Much for the compliment and thanks for being on here, man. I really do appreciate it. A lot of people have been asking for you, and I'm really happy that I got you on here. And just for everyone that's listening, what we're going to do today is we're going to go around the world and try to put all the pieces together of what's going on here. And we're going to start out in Greece. Now, we see Greece is basically bankrupt. I mean, there's no other way to put this. I know they're getting more and more debt, but they're bankrupt. And then we see Italy, Spain, France, and the other Euro countries kind of following in the footsteps of Greece right now. And we see that they've been talking about these bailouts, and of course it's not going to help the people whatsoever. What do you see happening in Greece? I mean, do you think these bailouts are going to help the country, or do you think the country's doomed here?
I mean, not at all. These bailouts with Greece is not going to help one iota. It's not going to help them at all. I mean, these people are in probably the most dangerous situation they've ever been in. Me and the team over at Rogue Money, we've been following what's been going on in Greece and writing about it and putting it out there, oftentimes with very pinpoint accuracy in terms of forecasting. What we see what's going on with Tsipras, I mean, that whole flip-flopping where this guy for 6 months straight was talking, as we say in New York, Dave, a lot of smack.
Yeah.
Talking a lot of smack about how he's going to stand up to the Troika, how he's going to take down the EU junta, and all these things. And he was playing both sides by flying over to Moscow, putting out ideas out there that he's going to have Greece default and then join the BRICS. And all of a sudden, when push comes to shove, the guy Tsipras folds like a cheap suit. And the question, the $250 billion question is why? Why all of a sudden did this guy who was so ardent, so a zealot when it comes to Greek nationalism fold to the EU, the EU bureaucratic monster? So there's a lot of speculation involved, whether Tsipras was blackmailed, this, that, and the other, or whatnot. But one thing that has occurred with Tsipras folding like a cheap suit is this. The EU is going to ramrod a lot of these austerity measures. One of those austerity measures is this. You see, in Greece, as it is in Spain, and my wife's family's from Spain, they have a tremendous amount of foreclosed homes over there. And these foreclosed homes, rather than having these people out in the streets, okay, the government has said in Spain as well as in Greece that, hey, you know what? Why don't you guys stay in your homes? It's better for you to stay in there than rather than being out in the streets. And it's better for you to be there because you know what? You'll have shelter. At least there's a roof over your head. But now, with these latest legislation that's been passed to austerity, they are going to fast track various lawsuits to get these people evicted from their homes. Okay? And that's going to put a tremendous amount of pressure on the people because now they're going to find themselves homeless. Why? Because we're witnessing a land grab on top of everything else, okay? Then on top of that, it was announced that this January 2016, the turn of the new year, all Greek bank accounts will become, ready. They will be, what's the word I'm looking for?
Eligible
for bail-in, okay?
Yep.
And that's huge. So there is a massive, if there's an anger before within Greece, right now is absolute fury. We can expect the Syriza party to be thrown out and possibly a very strong nationalistic party coming in, perhaps even the Golden Dawn could take power. Tsipras is about to lose his parliament. He's about to lose his party. So the situation in Greece is going from bad to worse. These people are the people that are dumpster diving. It's so bad, Dave. I don't know if you know this or not, but when when there's new children being born into families, what they're doing in Greece is there's so many abandoned kids because nobody can afford to feed these kids. Families are leaving them on the doorsteps of police stations, fire stations, governmental buildings, and now the government has issued cardboard boxes that have a signal on top that's a flashing beacon and also makes a noise. You simply put your kid in the box and you leave him somewhere and leave a noise, and the government official will pick the kid up to go to an orphanage. This is how tragic the situation is. Now, the issue that I made about the foreclosures in Greece, you got to also understand these foreclosure issues also exist simply because you have multiple people that are living in that home. You have maybe 2, 3 generations that are living in that single house. Now you're kicking these people out of the house. That's 3 generations of people that you're throwing out into the street. This is a big, big mess. On top of that, the massive infrastructure grabs that are going on with bridges, with roads, with utility companies, all these things are happening, and we're seeing the solution for these animals in Brussels that sit in the EU, and that solution is to devour everything. These crazy nut jobs. So it's pretty bad out there, man.
Yeah, they go right into these countries. They continually give them debt, and they go in and they just start buying all this stuff up on pennies on the dollar, just
Yep.
taking basically the country. That's really what they want.
Exactly.
Yeah, and this is going to spread. I mean, already S&P downgraded Europe. I know Europe is continually telling us that they're in a recovery, but it was downgraded, and we know they're not in a recovery. They're
Nah.
really hurting. Unemployment skyrocketing, youth unemployment skyrocketing. It's just awful. I mean, this eventually will spread around the world. I mean, this cannot be contained, can it?
I mean, there is some containment policies that are being done. I've seen that. I mean, even though the countries in the BRICS, they are the cleanest shirts
Hmm.
in the playground, so to speak. But I mean, for instance, David, like yesterday I woke up and there was 23 world markets that are in some sort of collapse or whatnot. And I tweeted out there, I said, you know what? There are 23 major markets that are in collapse. Most of them are in the ASEAN region right now. Some of them are in the emerging economies. And the answer to these nations, the answer for them to weather these coming storms, to come out on the other side viable and winning, is to de-dollarize. Because they'll go through a little bit of pain, but they will not sink if they can de-dollarize, if they can shore up on hard assets. And we're seeing those moves also happening with China. They are getting very bold with what they're doing.
You mentioned China. I mean, we see their stock market has dropped quite a bit.
Yep.
We also see the explosion in Tianjin. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, what do you think happened there?
Tianjin it's pretty interesting. The verdict is still out. I've talked to some of my intel guys who are who have backgrounds in physics and who served in various clandestine as well as military operations. And these guys have said to me, one of them in particular, my buddy Wayne, my buddy W, he said it best. He said, when you look at the explosion, it doesn't look like something from that was an explosive device, just the physics of it from the floor on out,
Mm-hmm.
but it looks like something came from above impacting in, which this was before anybody was talking about rods of God and all these other, was it a missile strike, whatever, or nuke. I mean, there's no radiation there, but this is before anybody was talking about that. He mentioned that. And then, and this is before I even seen the pictures of this, 5-acre lake that has formed in that
Mm-hmm.
area. And I'm saying to myself, my God, this is something definitely happened there. I mean, we know that there was 2 explosions. One was the small minor one, which I believe was the quote unquote chemical explosion. Okay, it was a small minor chemical explosion that did occur, but somehow it was timed and sequenced in such a way that that chemical explosion was able to provide cover for the much larger explosion that took place immediately after that.
Right.
So I believe, and and talking with some of my guys, that there was some sort of a kinetic weapon used, and we know that these kinetic weapons, like you take a tungsten rod, or when these guys are talking about the rods of God, and you're able to launch it from space with pinpoint accuracy. You reach a velocity of 32,000, 32,000 feet per second. You're looking at Mach 30 plus. There's no way to defend against that. There's no traceability, a plausible deniability, and I think it's moving so fast. It's cameras will have a hard time. I mean, regular cameras can't even pick it up. So it's something definitely happened in Tianjin, and the craziest thing is that Tianjin attack happened within 24 hours of the Chinese saying, "Hey, we're devaluing our currency," which is their way of saying that we're depegging from the dollar, and they did depeg. And within 24 hours, we see this strike. And then today it was announced, actually late last night, it was announced that the U.S. is getting kicked out of Djibouti and China is going to be sending, their troops to take over there. And one of the things that have been leaking out in the intel world for some time, there's been little proxy conflicts all over the world between the U.S. and the Chinese and the Russians. And one of those hotspots was, Djibouti, which is situated on the horn of the western side of Africa, the Horn of Africa over there. And it's a critical, integral part for the Suez the Suez Canal, the Middle East, the flow of oil, very strategic location. And then the Chinese have come in there and they're spending 400 million renovating their ports. They're spending $3.5 billion on rail. I mean, they're just coming in with infrastructure deals that are just too sweet to ignore. And we're seeing the U.S. getting kicked out. We're seeing the Chinese coming in. So there's a lot of things that are happening behind the scenes, Dave. There's no doubt there's some serious power plays that are occurring. The laughable announcement of China saying, "Yeah, we only got 1,650 metric tons of gold," which is ridiculous. I mean, they're 20,000 metric tons plus from everyone that I've talked to.
Right.
And then right after they announced their gold holdings, they get, I've been saying it for 10 months that China has no desire to be part of the IMF and their trash basket of currencies called the SDR. And so the Chinese get kicked out of the IMF. And for all intents and purposes, the IMF is a unfunded white elephant. It's a proxy agency of a club of debtors. So the Chinese had no desire to be part of that. They knew they were going to get kicked out, so this way they have legal justifications to say to the world, hey, you know what? We try to help and fix this whole entire problem. Look, they kicked us out of the IMF. In the meantime, they're building up their AIIB, which right now stands at 56 members strong. The BRICS have grown to about 135 nations that are behind it. I mean, they see the handwriting on the wall. When you have the largest economies, 25 of the largest economies in the world, and these 25 nations, they don't see eye to eye on a lot of things. But they all agree that they're not going to trade in dollars, and they've all set up currency swaps. That tells you something. The handwriting's on the wall.
Yeah, they're completely separating themselves. I mean, Russia, China, and the other BRIC, they're completely kind of backing off, saying, listen, okay, let's do everything on our own.
Yep.
And they're setting everything up on their own. Okay, let's move now over to what is happening in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. We see right now, I mean, there is the Minsk 2, there was the Minsk 1, there's the Minsk 2. Yeah. Putin is out there trying to broker peace, stop things from happening all over the place. At least that's the way I see it. And we see in Ukraine, we know the U.S. government, central bankers, they don't want this to happen. They want Ukraine. They want the southeastern region. They want Crimea back. I mean, do you see war breaking out there?
I mean, there's always a potential for war, but the Russians have that area on lockdown. For instance, mm-hmm. The numbnuts over at NATO who are beating their little chests and saying, mm-hmm. "Oh yeah, we're going to set up combat air patrols in the Ukraine." And what did Putin do within a matter of days? He set up S-400 surface-to-air missiles. S-400s are the most advanced missiles in the world. I mean, it is a pretty much 100% kill ratio, and we have no counter to it. I mean, this is a missile that flies at Mach 7 hypersonic speeds. It does 120 G maneuvers. There's no way to counter it. And the S-400 can track stealth aircraft. That's one thing I want to make it clear. So any notion of some American propagandists out there saying, "Oh yeah, we're going to fly our stealth B-2 stealth fighters," okay.
So the F-35 would be no match.
The F-35 is a flying pig. Yeah. I've been saying it for years. It's horrendous. I mean, a MiG-21 from the 60s will shred an F-35 in a dogfight, and that's a fact.
Yeah.
So the Russians put that S-400 batteries and S-300 batteries right there, so that nullifies any sort of combat air patrol that they can set up, and those batteries could take down those aircraft in Ukrainian territory with no problem. So Ukraine is devolving into a failed state. Isn't it pretty interesting? The question is, why does the EU want all the land in Ukraine? Why do they want? It's the same reason why they want all the land in Greece. What's on the shores of Greece? Well, Greece is sitting on a very large natural gas deposit. Ukraine is the same thing, but it's not in the mainland Ukraine. It happens to be in the Crimea. Right in the Black Sea, there's a large natural gas deposit. Putin knows this, okay? So that's what this whole entire squabble is about. It's all about energy. It's all about control of energy. And the U.S. at this point doesn't care if they start, some sort of a massive war in the process. These guys are nuts. And one of the things, I think Gerald Celente said it best, when people have nothing left to lose, they lose it. And the U.S. is getting to that point. It's getting very dangerous, and they're getting very desperate. And desperate people always do stupid things. So Ukraine, what do we got going on? We have Nazis that are running rampant. We have oligarchs that are fighting each other. This is all things that we've talked about in Rogue Money for quite some time right now. In fact, one of the contributors to Rogue Money is a guy named James, the Russian analyst, writes the best darn articles, the most in-depth intelligence reports on Russia and Ukraine I've ever read in my entire life. And I'm not saying it because the guy just writes for the site. I'm saying this guy's amazing. He's been on the radio show a few times. Dave, if you ever want to interview him, I recommend you want to get a real ground level what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. That's the guy to talk to.
Okay.
But Ukraine is spiraling into a failed state. Battles between oligarchs. It's turning toward a narco state, which is kind of what happens wherever the U.S. and NATO goes. And on top of that, you're having human sex trafficking rings popping up. It is deplorable what they've done to this country. They've taken this country from a first world country in terms of its infrastructure, and then they brought it to almost on its way to a third level status. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, they do this everywhere. I mean, we look in the Middle East. I mean, they did this in Lebanon, Libya, Iraq. I mean, actually, it's the same pattern. It's go into a country, destroy the economy, create some humanitarian need, and basically steal all the natural resources.
Yep.
That's pretty much it.
Yep.
So in the Middle East right now, I mean, we're seeing Yemen being bombed right now. We're seeing Libya basically having two governments, the puppet government and the other government that's in Tripoli. We see Lebanon falling apart, Iraq falling apart, and now we have, of course, the Islamic State, which is in Syria, in Iraq, and popping up in all different places, and we really know what they are. They're a proxy army for the U.S. And this is all about the petrodollar, isn't it?
Absolutely. We're seeing some major moves that are occurring. There's a lot of movings and shakings happening even with the House of Saud. It's pretty interesting. Back in September of 2014, I kind of reported that I think I was the only one to report that one of the Saudi princes, I forgot his name because these guys have these long hyphenated names I tend to forget. But one of the Saudi princes, he was carjacked in Paris. Okay, his motorcade was hijacked. They had two hit teams descend upon a 10-car motorcade and lifted off the guy with 300,000 euros in cash and quote unquote secret documents. The Saudi government didn't make any other acknowledgement towards that. They just left it alone. The Mercedes vans that were used to hijack the motorcade was found out in the French countryside, burned to a husk. So this was a straight up professional hit. And you find out who that prince is. Well, that prince is somebody who has been in talks with the Russians and the Chinese. He's very well connected individual, which is pretty interesting because when you look at the current Saudi monarchy with King Salman and the Crown Prince Mohammed, these guys are pro-Western. So the question becomes, and then you have the Saudi energy and defense ministers, which are really been last few weeks and last few months been setting up quite a few meetings with the Russians. In fact, I think there was a couple of $1 billion investment that the Saudis have done with a Russian agricultural firm. So all of a sudden, there seems to be some sort of a rift in the House of Saud, which I find to be pretty interesting. Now, this is also occurring while this is happening directly to the southern border in Bahrain, and all the way down into Yemen, you have a Shiite uprising. And the Shiites in Yemen are pretty interesting. These are the Houthis. And the Houthis and the Sunni, even though the Houthis are categorized as Shiites, they have more in common with Sunnis. But nevertheless, the Houthis, which are really funded as an Iranian proxy, and for those that don't know, Iran and Saudi Arabia have been fighting a proxy war for decades now, absolute decades. And this is creating massive pressure coming in from the south. And then the kingdom, the House of Saud, also has to worry about the situation in the north because ISIS is a U.S.-created attack dog that they can funnel this attack dog in whichever way they so see fit. And now the Saudis are, they're continuing to build up this fence, this massive bombardment on their northern border with Iraq to prevent any kind of spillover not just from refugees, but from ISIS coming and plowing into their territories. So these are some serious, serious things that are occurring within the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And then you have the continued situations in Syria, the continued situations in North Africa. All of this is basically what we're witnessing, folks, is the end of the petrodollar. Because while the U.S. has been following this insane British diplomacy, this insane British gunboat diplomacy of command and of divide and conquer, right? The Chinese and the Russians have been going in and setting up mutually beneficial trade agreements and energy agreements and win-win situations here. So the people are receptive towards that. People are not receptive towards chaos, disorder, destruction. Nobody wants that. No right human being in their mind wants that. No average person in the Middle East wants that. They want prosperity. They want to be able to send their kids to college. They want to have a successful and bright future for their countries. They don't want to be under this nonsense. So you're seeing this massive rift that is developing in the Middle East that's only going to get bigger, and we are seeing the birth of a new petro system, a petro transactional system, be it the petro yuan, or they go with a gold trade settlement note, or some sort of currency swap, or whatever have you. But we are seeing definitely the end of the petrodollar, as well as in conjunction the end of the dollar as world reserve currency. There's no doubt about it.
So let me ask you, and I'm sure everyone's thinking this, when the petrodollar dies, what repercussions are we going to see here in the United States?
Oh, man. I mean, when the petrodollar goes bust, you can pretty much kiss King Dollar off of its throne. Those repercussions will come hard and fast. It will come hard and fast in the sense I could see people just dumping massive U.S. dollar treasury dump-offs, massive dumping of the dollar globally, all of which will come back onto our shores as a tsunami of hyperinflation. I mean, right now we're in a little bit of a deflationary period. I kind of see that as right before a tsunami, you have the waves, the water kind of goes away from the shore. It gets sucked out back into the ocean. Well, that's kind of like what's happening right now. That's why we're seeing a lot of deflation. But it's building up to a hyperinflationary tidal wave. And it's that tidal wave that is going to be crashing upon our shores. And that tidal wave is being formed by events in Greece, by events in the Ukraine, by events in China, in events with the BRICS, and events with the AIIB, and events with with the petrodollar. All of these things are coming in culmination, and it's going to be very, very painful scenario that 99% of Americans are not even ready for, not even thinking about.
Right. I mean, it's funny because John Kerry said something, and it's been all over the corporate media and the alternative or new media, where he said if we don't make this Iran deal, the dollar is going to collapse.
Yep.
Let me ask you, what do you think he meant by that?
Simple. See, for the longest time, folks, since I'd say about 2008, I believe. About 2007, 2008, we've been going to war with Iran every year. Oh, we're going to go strike Iran. We're going to blow up Iran. We're going to do this to Iran. We're going to do that to Iran. They got nukes. They're going to get nukes. So here's the backstory. Here's the real honest truth of what's going on with Iran. The U.S. has a long history of meddling with Iran and screwing with Iran and putting the people in a bad predicament. We're the ones who kicked out, Time Magazine Man of the Year, Mohammad Mossadegh, who kicked out the Soviets, who was like a champion of democracy. The world loved the man, except he did one horrible thing, Dave. He decided to use the profits of oil from his nation to the benefit of his own people. God forbid. So Mossadegh, was deposed, and we put in the Shah of Iran and the Savak, and it was like the most dangerous, most horrendous time in Iranian history. And then you have the religious revolution with the Ayatollah Khomeini. Fast forward to today. Well, Iran is, most people, if you get out of your Western thinking glasses, I deal business with Persians, with Iranians. They are a very secular society. Okay, don't let it fool you. They're very educated. They're very smart. They're not Arabs. Okay, and there's a clear distinction. There's a very clear distinction between Persian mentality and Arab mentalities. Two different things. And the other thing is, no one's ever conquered Persia. Nobody has. Okay, so it's a different type of fighting spirit those people have. The Iranians have been sitting on oil. In fact, the dirty little secret is Iran has more oil than Saudi Arabia. And Iran, if given, see, the thing that makes Saudi oil so wonderful, folks, is not because it's the most abundant oil supply in the world. That would be the Russians. What makes Saudi oil so wonderful is that they're able to extract it out of the ground in the cheapest possible way, with the least amount of cost. That's what makes it so amazing. The Iranians have the same thing, but the lack is they do not have refinery capabilities in order to refine it and bring their oil into the market. This has been a huge problem for many decades. So the Iranians are like, okay, you know what? We can't, we don't have the electrical infrastructure in place to set up these refineries to adequately refine oil. We need to really ramp up our electrical infrastructure, and the way to do that is not, solar power, it's not wind generators, it's actually nuclear power, okay? The dirty word, nuclear power, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So Iran says, okay, we need to build nuke plants. And all of a sudden, the U.S. realizes that if the Iranians were able to develop their own oil and their own nuclear plants to refine the oil, they can bring oil to market, and they don't have to price it in dollars, because they're willing to sell it to the Chinese, they're willing to sell it to the Russians in gold and in or their own currencies. And we've seen the whole Iranian, Turkey, Indian, for lack of a better word, I don't know, that triangle of that deal they had going on, where the Indians and the Turks bought Iranian oil and paid for it in gold, and Turkey played as the intermediary for that whole entire transaction. So the Iranians are willing to do that. The U.S. knows this. So the U.S. is like, wait a minute, if they are allowed their oil reserves, which many are estimating to be 5 to 7 times bigger than Saudi Arabia, that is going to be a huge threat to the petrodollar, number one. Number two, it's going to give other nations an idea, hey, maybe we should sell our oil in non-dollar terms. Maybe Venezuela would say, hey, you know what, maybe we should do that. Maybe Nigeria would say, hey, maybe we should do that. And it will spread throughout the entire OPEC. Because, OPEC is the way it is because Saudi Arabia is the biggest player on the block. But here's the Iranians, they're bigger than the Saudis. They happen to be in the same neighborhood. And they're selling it in non-dollar terms. Oh, that's a no-no. So the Iranians said, hey, we need nuclear power. The U.S. is like, no. And the Iranians are like, all right, fine. You know what? This is what we'll do. We'll take our oil. We'll give it to you guys. You guys refine it for us and give it back to us, and we'll pay you. And the U.S. is like, no. And then the Iranians is like, wait a minute, but what do you want us to do with the oil? And for lack of a better word, the U.S. said, eat it and die. Basically, eat your oil and die. Because the Iranians like, we have all these resources, but you're preventing us from developing. And all of a sudden, that's when you have the whole, what's that former? Ahmadinejad said he's going to wipe Israel off the face of the... Folks, let me tell you something about Iran. And there's a clear distinction, and I need people to understand this, between Israel, Zionism, and Judaism. These are three very distinct things, okay? Judaism is not Zionism, and Zionism is not Judaism. There are over 50,000 Jews that live in Tehran, Iran, and they've been there for thousands of years. Okay? There are lots of Jews that live in Iran that don't leave. In fact, I know a lot of Jews here from Brooklyn that would actually fly to Iran to have conferences with their Jewish brothers and sisters in Iran. They're treated wonderfully. They have a great time. They have no problems with the Muslims there, and the Muslims have no problem with them, the Shiites, okay? And they fly back. So where's this, they're going to blow Israel off the face of the planet? And I mean, come on. Mm-hmm. The beef that Iran has is with the government of Israel, is with Zionism. They have no problem with Judaism as a religion or as a belief because you have Jews that live there. Okay, but then you have, they want the end times, the 90 months. These are people with very, very poor understanding of how the Middle East actually works. So that's what's going on in Iran. So when Kerry literally said, if we don't strike this deal, because now the Russians and the BRICS and the rest of the world are helping to develop Iranian oil. The Russians have, they're about to do the deal with Iran that they did with Turkey, that they're going to develop all Turkey's nuclear power plants. And you got to understand something about Russia and Iran. I was probably the only one in the world that made this connection here. If you guys remember back in December, you have Christophe de Margerie, and this is a guy that I wrote about extensively. He was the former CEO of Total Petroleum. Okay, Christophe de Margerie was one of the guys who were so vocal and said, "Why is the oil even priced in dollars? let's get away from this. Let's get rid of the petrodollar. And within a month of him saying that, his plane explodes, okay, on a runway in Moscow, in one of the busiest airports in Europe. Those things don't happen. His plane hits a snowplow. I mean, what it would have been more believable if they drowned the man in an inch of water. Okay, so Christophe de Margerie drives. So the question is, why was he whacked? Number one, and within the same time frame, within the same matter of months prior, we had BNP Paribas, one of the largest banks in France. They get fined $9 billion, which is the biggest fine in banking at that time. Okay, I think it still is the biggest fine ever. $9 billion. This is a bank that on yearly makes about a $7.3 billion profit. Why would they be fined $9 billion, number one? And number two, be banned from using dollars for a specified amount of time. Well, let's look at it real quick. Total Petroleum, okay, was involved in the South Pars development deal, which was Total Petroleum was working with the Iranians in order to develop Iranian oil, helping to refine it, helping to build refining technologies and a lot of engineering going into it to enable the Iranians to extract the oil at even a cheaper rate than, or as cheap, or if not cheaper than the Saudis. That's what's going on here. So that technology that they were developed back in 2006 has come to fruition right now in 2015. The Russians were involved in it too. The U.S. hears about South Pars, and in 2000, in the end of 2006, they shut the whole project down. Okay, they said, okay, no more. And then, Total said, okay, fine, we're not going to. But since then, BNP Paribas and Total, using various, contractors and even the Russians, were continuing to build Iranian refining technology. And then all of a sudden, the U.S. hears it again, and now, boom, they hit, BNP with a major fine. And then Christophe de Margerie and Total Petroleum, which is one of the biggest supporters or sponsors of the International Oil Conference that takes place in Moscow every year. Christophe de Margerie was very vocal in the European Union about getting the heck away from the petrodollar. He winds up dead. And he winds up dead right after his meetings with Putin, Medvedev, and the guy who was in charge of one of the largest private natural gas companies outside of Gazprom. So this is not a coincidence. And all of this centers around Iran. Why? Because Iran is on the cusp of bringing its oil to market. It's going to drop the oil price even more. And unless, the U.S. makes nice with the Iranians at this point, they're going to absolutely lose everything. So the U.S.'s hope on this deal, well, hey, we'll let you have nuclear capacity, but price your oils in dollars. And the Iranians are like, okay, sure, buddy. Throwing up the okay sign. Yeah, okay, sure, buddy. We'll price it in dollars. Yeah, no problem. So this is the idiocy. This is like amateur hour at the White House. This is amateur hour at the State Department. The Iranians will have the nuclear capacity. They will have the refining capacity, but they will not price their oils in dollars. The entire Middle East knows this. They all know it. The Saudis know it. And that's what this whole entire reverberations have been going forward that have been happening. In fact, back in April of 2014 and through May, the Saudis and the Iranian intelligence agencies have been meeting in secret in Algeria. And not only them, but they've also called their proxy organizations. So the Saudis called up Al-Nusra, the Iranians called up Hezbollah, and all of them got together and they said, you know what, we need to come to a couple of agreements. This is happening. The world is about to change. There are some conflicts between you and I, but what the deal is that we need to understand that ISIS is a U.S. created non-Islamic terrorist organization. And within a matter of weeks of them saying that, you have the Arab League conference, where many of the leaders in the Arab League conference have come forward and said ISIS is not an Islamic movement, and they are a bunch of terrorists. So there's so many things happening right now, David, within the Middle East. It is incredible. We are seeing the death of the dollar. We're seeing a desperate United States.
Now, with this death of the dollar, I mean, here in the United States, of course, the corporate media, Obama, the Fed, they're all talking like everything is fine here. We're in this fantastic recovery. We're going to be raising interest rates. I mean, do you see that this economy here is getting any better whatsoever?
No, it's a disgusting, deplorable joke. Anybody could take apart the economy in very very quickly and very easily.
Mm.
The first one is you look at margin debt. Margin debt is it's all approaching 700% at this point. You're looking at at how many people are actually involved in the market. I've been saying for years, how the heck? I mean, this when the market was at 15, 16, 17,000 points. And I'm saying to myself, how is the market getting this high on such low volume? There's no volume. Okay, volume is down, money velocity is down, margin debt's through the roof. The PE ratios are all of that is off. There's no reason for the market to be this high. Then you have, check this out, 93.7, actually right now it's 93.8 million people permanently unemployed, 10.6 million receiving unemployment benefits. That's not including this is separate from the 93.7. Okay, it's separate. 10.6 million on receiving unemployment benefits. Almost 50 million at this point on food stamps, 101 million on some sort of governmental welfare. And that there's some overlap in those numbers. But when you add it all up, you're looking at an unemployment rate that's probably right now from every major firm that tracks. And I've talked to my buddy Michael Rosecliffe with Looking Glass and his software and ran the statistics on it. We're looking at a little over 30% unemployment. We're looking at over 50% of the country is effectively non-productive. It's that bad, but yet, 18,000 points of what? Stock buybacks, high-frequency trading, rigging the market, margin debt, margin loans, and the federal and Fed stimulation or manipulation at this point. So that's it. We're running a fraudulent, cheap veneer of a market, and we're calling it an economy. It's a joke, man. It's horrible. There is no recovery. It's getting worse.
Yeah, I mean, do you think the Fed? I mean, they keep talking about interest rate hikes. Like, what do you think they're using this for? Let me just ask you, what do you think they're continually coming out saying? Oh, we're going to raise interest rates. Why do you think they're continually saying this?
I think they're continually saying that simply because it gives the suckers that are currently in the market and the con artists, letting them know that, hey, you know what? Oh, the market's healthy. So every time we say, yeah, we're going to raise interest rates at this point, that's signaling to the unknowing investor and those who are not awake and listening to the X22 report, or they're not reading Rogue Money, those people will be like, okay, well, you know what? The Fed's saying that they're going to raise interest rates. That means the economy is good. It's getting to a level where the Fed doesn't need to tamper with it. And in fact, they stopped QE, which is nonsense. The QE is still continuing. It's continuing in stealth. They are buying their own debt and they're hiding their own debt. That's what they're doing. That's what QE is all about at this point. So they can't raise rates. If they raise rates, let's say like 2%, you can say goodbye to the housing market. It's done. The housing market is done. 2% raise in the interest rate, just to 2%, right, from 0 to 2%. Over. You're looking at like a 40% collapse in housing values. I mean, already, mortgage applications, the lowest it's ever been in since like almost the 50s at this point. Okay, but yet housing prices are going up based on what? Well, you got BlackRock, and you got Goldman Sachs, you got all these companies, even foreign national companies that are buying your Chinese companies that are buying U.S. real estate, think it's a great investment. Let's get on in. Party's great.
So
this.
let me
Go ahead.
go ahead. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, this party is going to end very badly, Dave. No doubt.
Let me ask you, from everything that we've been seeing, with the petrodollar dying, what's happening in China, what's going on in Ukraine, we see the economy is really not improving. How do you think this is all going to end here? I mean, what should people expect to see happen when this thing completely falls apart?
I mean, my God, it's we're going to see. There's an old saying, and Dave, you know this. People always say that that hyperinflation is like the Grim Reaper, that no one is looking for it, and then it suddenly happens, and it happens very quickly. I mean, could you imagine Weimar Germany, day to day, the price fluctuations of the Deutschmark back then, and imagine how it's going to be today with everything being computerized. The hyperinflation is going to be 10 times worse, maybe 100 times faster, and it's going to come upon us unawares. And if people are not ready, and folks, it's not that you just shore yourself up to survive. We need to get to know our neighbors. We need to get to know our communities. because the end game here, folks, is look, the government is making preparations for them to stay viable on the other end of this. We need to do the same because the game right now is he who wins on the other side of this collapse is the one who gets to dictate what happens in the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Okay? Governments is what got us into this mess. We don't need that fat, bloated, disgusting, putrid behemoth to be the last entity standing on the other side of this. We, the people, have to get back to being the people, being the educated, knowledgeable citizenry that has the ability to guard sacred liberty and the responsibility to keep our republic. That's who we have to be. So we have to stay winning on this side. It's great that people are listening to the X22 report, roguemoney.net, and the great work that sites like Dave's and mine and we're all putting out there. But we have to take action in being the great communities that we once were and get out of this nonsense because if we can win on the other side of this, we can get our country back. We can, get government out of the way. We can end this bloated bureaucracy that is sucking the wealth out of all of us. That's the only answer, Dave.
Yeah. Do you think I completely agree with you, and I tell people all the time to be prepared. I mean, do you see food shortages? Do you see riots? Do you see people? Well, we know they're going to lose their jobs. I mean, that's just a given. I mean, you see all this coming.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you look at all the supply chains. Supply chains are run paper thin at this point, okay? Money velocity is practically zero, which is freezing up the credit markets, which is creating a solvency crisis. And you look at companies like Walmart and your major grocery stores that depend on credit in order to buy their inventory, pay their employees, the whole 9 yards. That's affecting them big time. In fact, let me give you an example. Just recently, past a week ago, a Walmart supercenter not too far from where I live, a major Walmart supercenter, which was 24 hours, and you've all been to Walmart supercenters, they're all 24 hours. This one closes at 12 a.m. now. They're not 24 hours anymore. It's unbelievable. These are just the signs, folks. These things are coming to a head without a doubt.
Listen, V, I really appreciate you coming on the X22 Report Spotlight. Like I said, you can reach him at roguemoney.net. Just go right to his website. He has all the information there. I'll be putting all the links at the bottom of this video. V, thank you very much for all this great information.
Dave, it's my pleasure. Thank you for allowing me to be on, and thank you for the awesome work you do. And folks, you need to listen to X22. The Guerrilla recommends it. I watch Dave's videos on YouTube. It's Dave, thank you, man.